Hello empty AV1s. I'm going to continue with the remainder of Ornamental Chords A now, and that involves the third and fourth sections of this document. That is Ornamental fifth progressions on page 123 and Ornamental third progressions, which are on page 134. I hope you can see this. I'm kind of focusing on one landscape page at a time now to see if I can't improve the quality of the video that I'm sending you. But it does mean that I'm having to move pages around, and this is kind of my marker, this white page. So I hope it works. This is still a bit of an experiment. All right, I'm sending you this work now. Although you're busy with the ornamental fourths and ornamental sixths at the moment, I'm, as you know, going to be out of action next week when I'm in hospital, and goodness knows how long they're going to keep me there. I don't know, because these, issues involving my inclination to develop infections very soon. So I suspect he's going to keep me there for a while on an antibiotic drip. And I don't know how the Wi-Fi at the hospital will work, whether I'll be able to do any kind of work or communicate with you guys at all. So I thought I'm going to make the next set of lessons so long and send it to you possibly over the weekend. I'm not sure, whenever I can get it ready. And then Laura's going to help me. She said maybe we should try a YouTube link and see if that doesn't give you a better quality video, or a less interrupted video at least. So I'll see. We'll experiment with different ways and see how we can best send you these videos. Is that about right? Move the camera slightly because it's skew. Here we go. So this is actually work that you must do while I'm in hospital. You're going to finish the ornamental fourths and sixths this week. And then next week, while I'm in hospital, you must go through these videos and through the notes about ornamental fifths and ornamental thirds. And at the end of next week, there'll be a worksheet for you to do on those two sections. And the week following that, you can start working on the final assignment, which is at the end of this set of notes. The assignment that has analysis of excerpts in it and some creative writing to do. Page 145 onwards is the creative writing and the analysis. So then I'll give you 2 weeks to work on that. And then we will have finished with Ornamental Chords A. All right, so just as the concept of the ornamental fourth that we've done means you go up 4 and you come back. And the ornamental sixth means, I'm just using the tonic as the example now, but other chords can do the same. You go up 6 and you come back. So the ornamental fifth, by the same token, means from the structural chord, and again I'm just saying, for example, tonic, you go up 5 and you come back. That's what an ornamental fifth is. So it's the chord that's in the middle there. And again, it has to do with the particular melodies that make that an ornamentation rather than a structural chord. 151 is a difficult one. Those are clear because that's a retrogression. That's a retrogression. So in normal structural harmony use, you wouldn't do that. It has to be ornamental. This one can sometimes be structural. You can go 151 as a structural progression. So it kind of is in this grey area where it is, sometimes you could call it structural and sometimes not. But there are very particular cases, because tonic is not the only one that can do this. Tonic isn't the only one who can get an ornamental fifth. So there are times when it is very clearly an ornamental progression. And again, as I said, it has to do with the ornamental melodies. All right, so you get different kinds at the level of the ornamental fifth. I'm just having to check every time that the page is in view. So it's the ascending fifth, perfect fifth. And again, as with the fourths and the sixths, it's not all of the structural chords. Not all of the structural chords, 1, 6, 4, 2, 5, 3. Not all of them can take ornamental fifths. In this particular case, it is specifically top of page 124. It is specifically the tonic group of chords and the subdominant group of chords. Primary, secondary, primary, secondary. So it's the tonic and the submediant. It's the subdominant and the supertonic. But again, remember that you cannot compose out an unstable chord like a diminished or an augmented chord. So it would exclude the supertonic in a minor key, which is a diminished chord. You can't compose it out with an ornamental fifth, but you can all of the other chords. Because remember, this ornamental fifth I'm talking about is in fact a perfect fifth. It has to be, there it says on page 123, ascending perfect fifth, not diminished fifth or augmented fifth or whatever. So you get different kinds of ornamental fifths, and the first one we are looking at, page 124. I hope you can see the page. I'm trying to just get your view of the page a bit better. Don't know if you can see what I'm doing. I hope so. Nope. Is that a bit better? There we go. The first kind that you get is again called auxiliary. So it means that there are 3 steps. That's what auxiliary means. Structural, then the auxiliary chord, and then you go back to structural. That's the first thing that it means. And the other thing that it means is that the actual melodies that cause the chord to arise are auxiliary melodies. They are neighbor note melodies. Okay, and those particular, the formula for it is basically written out here. It has to, whereas the ornamental fourths have got upper auxiliary melodies like amen. This one, the ornamental fifth, works on the basis of lower auxiliary melodies, but in this case to the doubled root and third of the structural chord. Okay, so the idea of it, just check that you can see this page. Yeah. The idea of it then, in other words, is according to that bulleted list over there, is, again, I'm just going to take the tonic chord of C major as our example, is that the root and the third, the C and the E of C, E, G, each get a lower auxiliary and go back. Mi, re, mi, do, ti, do. And again, as you have with most ornamental progressions, you will have an anchor note. You will have a note that is like the common denominator between the structural and the ornamental. And in this case, it is the fifth. The fifth of the structural chord is the anchor note, the one that is common to both. So in the process of doing that, you create CEG changes into GBD, upper fifth, C to G. That's the rationale behind the ornamental fifth that is explained over here. Now, of course, when you write in 4 parts, the bass can do different things. As we saw with the ornamental fourth, the bass could do different things. So that's where the distinction comes between the auxiliary 5-3, that means the ornamental chord's in root position, or the auxiliary 6-3, which means the ornamental chord in the middle is in first inversion. So that's why I've shown you here 4 chords to which you can do it. Those are the structure, the tonic and submediant in the tonic group, the subdominant and the supertonic in the subdominant group. In other words, ornamental fifths excludes the dominant group. You can't write an ornamental fifth progression at the level of the dominant or the mediant. Just because they sound ugly, that's why. composers never use them. They only use these 4. And you can see that I've written in brackets every time. It could be 1, 5, 1, or it could be 1, 5 in first inversion. 6, 2, 1. The same for all of the others. So I've said here, where have I said it? Yeah, root leaps in the bass. But that is also, it can also change depending on whether you're using an auxiliary 5/3 or not. So this composing out process, page 125. Now let me just check that you can see page 125 on my screen. There we go. This composing out process always involves the following melodic ornamentation when the structural chord is in root position and the ornamental chord is in first inversion. Okay, so that's the first kind, where the ornamental chord, I beg your pardon, where the ornamental chord, this is the one, sorry guys, the wrong one, where you use it in root position, where you use the chord in the middle in root position, as that's one of the 2 options, the auxiliary 5/3. Then what you will do to this thing is create a bass line that actually jumps from the root of this one to the root of that one and back. So then you create an auxiliary 5/3. The dominant chord's in root position. Or you can do the same thing, and what you rather do is you treat I should actually put this one in the bass now. Take that one away there, and I'll put a tenor G there. Is to double the 5th of your structural chord, the anchor note. The anchor note is the 5th of the structural chord. And then what you do is you take the do, ti, do melody, the lower auxiliary melody, and you use that in the bass, because that's also your structural chord in root position. But what you then have is your ornamental chord is in first inversion. And then what you do is not go ba 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 in a middle voice. It's just too awkward to jump like that in a middle voice. So what you rather do, because you're allowed to, remember you can always double the 5th of a chord instead of the doubling the root of the chord. So that's actually what ends up happening mostly, is that it involves 2 anchor notes, 2 fifths in your structural chord, which is 2 roots in your ornamental chord. So now you've got 2 fifths here and 1 root. You've got a third and a root and a 5th and a root, and then you go back to root, doubled 5th and 3rd. So those are the 2 options that are explained. The one is explained at the bottom of page 124, and the other one, involving the first inversion, is explained at the top of page 125. The root leaps are admitted, and the doubled stationary 5th of the structural chord acts as an anchor throughout, and it becomes, there's a doubled one. You use 2 of those anchor notes. All right, so that's what this is showing you. Again, this is an example where C major's tonic is the structural chord. We started out with a tonic with a doubled root, root, 5th. So now it is the doubled root in the tenor and the soprano's 3rd that are going to get lower auxiliaries. The alto is the 5th of the chord. It's going to stand still, and that's the anchor note, and the bass is going to jump to the root of the ornamental chord and back. Alternatively, I'm going to take that do, ti, do melody of the tenor, and I'm going to put it in the bass, which I can do because that's tonic in root position and that's dominant in first inversion. So if I do that, then I take the ba, ba, ba out altogether, and I have 2 so melodies. The tenor and the alto both have G, 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 stationary anchor note 5th. And you can do the same to the submediant. Auxiliary 5/3 involves the mediant chord as an auxiliary chord between 2 submediant chords, or you can double the fifth of the submediant and use the mediant chord in first inversion. And over here you can use the subdominant with a tonic chord in the middle. So here you see it becomes obvious that what we're dealing with is not structural, because you would not ordinarily go from subdominant to tonic and back to subdominant, or from supertonic to submediant and back to supertonic. So that tells you when the pattern is repeated at those levels, it is no longer a structural thing. And that's why 151 in that same format is probably also not intended as structural. And then the same with a supertonic and its ornamental fifth, which is the submediant chord, or supertonic in first inversion. Okay, now why I say the pattern, why 151 would probably also be ornamental in the context of the pattern, is that what these four structural chords represent, in the case of the ornamental fifths, just want to check that you can see this page. I'm going to keep on looking at my camera and going back to my page. They are what we call the four predominant chords. And of course you can always, in the structural sentence, you don't have to use all four of them. You can go 151, you can go 651, you can go 451, you can go 251, but you can also use them all in a row, in a sequence, one after the other. And why do I call them a sequence? 1, 6. And this is the order in which you would use them. The two tonic function chords first, primary, secondary, then the two subdominant function chords, primary and secondary, before you go to your cadence, 5-1, or whatever your cadence is. The four predominant chords arranged in a sequence, and I call them a sequence. Why? Because of the relationship between them. That is, in each case, a root movement of a descending third. Descending third. So it's like a pattern that gets repeated at each level. So it's the basis really for sequential repetition of stuff, where you've got a pattern at one level and then you repeat it at the next level and the next level and the next level before you go to your cadence. It's the basis for a sequence. And frequently, in fact, ornamental fifths do occur in a sequence way. In other words, something happens to tonic with an ornamental fifth, in other words, 1 and 5 and 1. And then it gets repeated at the submediant level, 6, 3, 6. And then it goes to the subdominant level, 1, 4, 1, 4. And sometimes the supertonic is just the end, or you can also repeat the sequence. So that's the pattern, and then when you repeat it at different levels in the scale, it's called sequence. Pattern, I hope you know these words, and those three are the sequences. So that's when it becomes very clear that 151 was intended actually as ornamental, because it gets repeated in ways that are clearly ornamental rather than structural. Just so by the way. All right, so we're going to look at ways in which composers use the auxiliary 5-3 or the auxiliary 6-3 ornamental fifth progression. First of all, in a non-sequential way over here. This is Brahms. Sorry, just want to check that you can see this page. Example 5.19. This is a typical non-sequential, so it's just like a random single event, the ornamental fifth. So he's in C major, and then he goes to 4, and this bar 2 has got a kind of a subdominant feel to dominant and back to tonic. But what he does in bar 2 is he goes, so from the accented subdominant. Remember, always the composing out happens from an accented beat. He goes back to tonic, which looks like a retrogression, but in fact, if you look at the way he's written the melodies, he's got the root and the third, the F and the A. Each one get a lower auxiliary. And then he's got the C as the anchor note, the fifth of the structural chord. And he's got a bass line that gives you the auxiliary chord in root position. All right, now the Bach is an interesting example, the next one. I've written a whole long thing here that you can read, but for now, I think the music itself should be self-explanatory, and then you can go back and read what I've written on page 126 about the Bach. Now, first of all, I want you to kind of split this thing up because it's an example of different kinds of uses of ornamental fifths, so it makes it a little more tricky. But essentially, you can see from the brackets that I've included here that Bach is dividing his music up into groups of 4 quavers in terms of what he does harmonically. So he's got the first 4 quavers in B flat major focused on the tonic chord with a lower auxiliary, and then he repeats it as a sequence at the level of the submediant in the second half of the bar, and then he goes to the subdominant, and then he goes to the supertonic, which he doesn't finish. That very often happens in this sequence, is that those 3 are complete, and then just reaching the supertonic chord is enough. The composer won't always complete the entire pattern again at the level of the supertonic. He'll just say, okay, I'm at the supertonic now, fine, let's carry on. So that's more or less what Bach has done here. He's giving you kind of a half a supertonic sequence. And then from there, so he's got a tonic, submediant, subdominant, and then a little bit of supertonic, and then the dominant, T, so, do. So essentially it's a big 1, 6, 4, 2, 5, 1. 1, 6, 4, 2, 5, 1. Okay, a progression. But the details of it involve, if we just look at the bass line, a do, ti, do. So now I want you, in every group of 4 quavers for now, let's just block out the 4th quaver because I'm going to come back to it. And I want you just to look at the first 3 quavers. And now this is 3-part harmony, not 4-part harmony. So what he's got there is a bass line with a tonics root, a middle voice with the 5th, and a soprano with a 3rd. And then he goes. So essentially he's got a bass line that's going from the root, lower auxiliary root. He's got an alto that stands on the anchor note, and he's got a soprano that goes 3rd, lower auxiliary 3rd. Okay, forget about the 4th quaver. And then he goes to the submediant chord over here, and he does exactly the same thing. From the root of the submediant, G, B flat, D, he goes root, lower auxiliary root, a middle voice that goes anchor note, and then a soprano that goes 3rd, lower auxiliary 3rd, and then he does the same thing to the subdominant, A flat, G, B flat in root position, anchor note in the middle, which is the 5th of the structural chord, and the 3rd of the structural chord gets a lower auxiliary and back. So if you look at those patterns, they go. I'm just going to leave out the 4th quaver, and then it goes to the submediant. Leave out the 4th quaver, go to the next bar, subdominant. Leave out the 4th quaver, and then he's got a very little bit of the supertonic, which doesn't complete. Okay, so that you can clearly see is an example of which one? Just make sure we're looking at the same page now. Example 5.7. It's the one where the ornamental chords in first inversion. So what Bach has done is, instead of having two anchor voices in the middle, he's just got one, and he's just written 3-part harmony. The do, ti, do, the mi, re, mi, and the so, so, so in the middle. That's all he's got. And then he repeats it at each level. Exactly like that. So that is typical of your ornamental fifths, is that they very often can get repeated sequentially through the predominant progression, 1, 6, 4, 2, or just partially through 2. Okay, so that's the ornamental fifth, auxiliary ornamental fifth, which can be in a root position, or it like Brahms was over there, or it can be in first inversion, like Bach used his over there. It can be isolated like Brahms, just a single ornamental fifth by itself, or they can all be used in sequence like Bach has done. All right, now the next kind of ornamental fifth is called a passing 6/4 ornamental fifth. Now you will have learned, I think, of passing 6/4s at school. I think most of you know about passing 6/4s. So this is not new, but this is just giving you a broader context into which to understand the passing 6/4. So again, with passing notes, if we call it passing 6/4, we mean they are passing notes, that the composing out of passing notes that have caused the ornamental progression to arise. So again, it would involve 3 steps. That's how a passing note works. There's a structural melody note, then there's the passing note, and then there is the resolution to another structural melody note. I hope you can all see that. So there, again, there's a step 1, 2, and 3. So it's the composing out of this which will cause a structural chord, a passing chord, and another structure, and a return to the structural chord on that side. That's how the passing chord concept works. 3 steps. That's what I've written there, phase 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so the passing 6/4 in particular has a certain, again, remember, you can't just randomly say I'm writing a passing progression unless you have the actual tunes, the actual melodies, the actual passing notes that cause it to happen. So how does this happen? The root and the third of the structural chord are now connected by passing notes. So instead of going mi, re, mi, do, ti, do, you take the re, mi, which was an lower auxiliary, and the do, and you now make the mi, re go to that do, like that, instead of going back to mi. And then what you do to compensate for it is you create another one that goes from the do to the re to the mi, so that you end up, so that you have 2 voices that cross through re and the root and the third of the chord. So just a play on how to use the root and the third with a non-chordal note in the middle. In this case, they're not lower auxiliaries, but passing notes. The one goes up and the one goes down. The root and the third of the structural chord. Can you see this page? No, you can't. Root and the third of the structural chord are now connected by passing notes, and they occur in the form of mirror patterns. What do I mean by a mirror pattern? I mean the one is like a mirror image of the other. So the one goes do, re, mi, and the other one goes mi, re, do. It's like the opposite. That's a mirror pattern. One of these is always in the bass, okay? Either the root passing note third, or third passing note root. One of those 2 must be in the bass. In other words, your structural chord must go from root position through the passing chord to first inversion, if that's in the bass, or it must go from first inversion through the passing note to the root position, because that's what a structural chord does. It has to be in either root position or first inversion. root position or first inversion. So that's why one of them must always be in the bass. Then we still have the idea of the lower auxiliary melody do, ti, do that we had with the auxiliaries. We still use that. Do, ti, do, root, lower auxiliary, and back to root. And we still have the anchor note, which is the fifth of this chord. That stands still as the anchor. So there's certain characteristics that we retain from the auxiliary ornamental fifth, which is the anchor note idea and the do, ti, do, lower auxiliary. All we've done now is we've taken the mi, re, mi, and we've changed it into a mi, re, do, or do, re, mi, and we've linked the root and the third of the chord in that way. So they share some passing 6/4s and auxiliary 5/3s, ornamental fifths share some characteristics, and then they have other things that are different about them. All right, so that's the vocal pattern that you must always use. If you're saying you're writing a passing 6/4 and you don't have that, can I just rewrite it again in a little formula? I'm going to use another page, if I may. Can I rewrite it and try to memorize this, guys? In a passing 6/4, you will always go root, passing note, third, and third, passing note, root. That's your mirror pattern. One of these two must be in the bass. And then you will have, to fill up your 4 voices, you will still have the idea of the root, lower auxiliary, lower neighbor note, and root. And then you will have the fifth that stands still as an anchor. You will always have that. So nothing jumps. That one stands still on the same pitch. That one goes up by step. This one goes down by step. This one goes down and back up by step. That is, if you don't have that in a passing 6/4, then you're not doing it correctly. The reason why you have to have it is because it's ornamental. It's based on certain ornamental tunes. It's not structural where you can just do what you like. Okay. So let's continue. I'm showing you, and you can go through them yourself. Again, we're involving the same structural chords. I know at school you mostly learn this passing 6/4 at the level of the tonic and the subdominant, but in fact it can occur in rare occasions also to the secondary triads 6 and 2. So again, it's the chords in the tonic